Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the new Warlord game's German veterans. These fellas are coming out relatively soon, and I'm not going to linger too long on the kit themselves because there's some brilliant pictures of them on the Warlord Games website, which I'll make sure to link to, and they're brilliant. I am going to labor that point a few times that they're just really good. As well, because they aren't clad in all of the camo gear that some of the late war guys are wearing, they're super quick to paint. So all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below. We'll keep things nice and quick here. Let's get started. Now, rather than doing a full-on kit review, I will say very quickly that if the German veterans are setting the standard for the new kits that are coming along from Warlord, they are going to be astonishing. The sheer number of bits, the additional parts to make in your engineers, officers, there's enough rifles for everybody, and having the heads and bases together with a few bits of extra equipment on a separate sprue, really interesting to see that. I think it's going to be the gold standard to look to as new kits come along. So that's my review. Nice and short, it is a brilliant kit. But what I've got here in front of me is one of the fellas that I made up as an officer, and I've quickly painted him with a little bit of Express because I just wanted to test out some of the colors, and to get a clearer look at the uniform. What we're going to do is get fussy about uniform. The reason for this is that the box art and I think the way that the guys have been based for the painted examples really implies that the German veteran box is for your mid-war campaigns, invasion of crossing into Stalingrad, Kursk, that sort of thing. They're very Eastern Front oriented, but that's not 100% the case. As ever, there's two bits to look at with your painting for what are really going to date your miniatures. And that'll be the collars and the boots. Now the collars are a tiny wee thing. Ordinarily we slap Fieldgrey over the entire miniature. These guys, with the button that's visible below the belt line, I'm pretty certain they're wearing a 6-buttoned tunic, which is going to mean it's either the M1936 or the M40. Now on our miniatures, there is very, very little difference between those two. And if you want to paint these guys for the very earliest campaigns, like the invasion of Poland and France, you could just as easily paint the collars with a bottle green, like a vibrant green, and that will work fine. And then otherwise, if you paint them in as completely field grey, these tunics are going to be suitable for pretty much the rest of the war, right through to your Fall of Berlin stuff. The other thing that's going to date the miniatures is the boots. Now these were issued to pretty much everybody. Production of them stopped completely in round about late 1943, but they were still being issued wherever possible into fall of 1944. So for your very late war guys, they are going to be in the ankle boots with the little gaiters. From 43 onwards is where you're going to see those little brown and blackish sort of shoes, the ankle boots. These bigger marching boots, they are going to be veteran items, from mid-43 onwards. So for your Stalingrad and what have you, this is going to start saying these guys know what they're doing, they've been around a while. But the reason why I ramble on about all of this is that the kit is actually incredibly versatile for when you want your troops to be set. You could even have these guys as defenders of Normandy if you really wanted to. The fellows that don't have the Y straps across their back, they aren't just useful as officers because there's quite a lot of photographs which show German troops not wearing the Y straps. So go nuts. It's an incredibly versatile kit. Gets my thumbs up 20 times over. So let's finally get on to some painting. Now I am going to paint the flamethrower chap because he's cool as hell. As a quick assembly note, now I got mine without the instructions, but I did find it easier to glue the arms on first and then adjust the position of the pack on his back so that these two little cables would line up. But once you've got your miniature assembled, first thing to do is to prime him. Now I've used here ash grey from the Army Painter, and it's not going to matter too much what you use. Any medium grey, whether it be Mechanica Standard grey, Uniform grey, or a Halford's car primer, will not matter. A medium to light grey, perfect. So our first step will probably not come as any great surprise. I've got here German Fieldgrey from VALLEJO, and I've thinned it down with just a little bit of water to make sure I'm not going to gum up any of the detail. Going to go over the entire uniform, and if I do hit things like his his skin or his weapons or what have you, I'm not terribly fussed. You don't have to deliberately steer onto them to prove a point, but don't worry if you do hit them. Now I have come back and given that a second coat once the first one dried. It's important to keep your paint nice and thin while you're doing these all over base coats. If you want to save yourself a bit of time though, what you can do is pick up the VALLEJO Fieldgrey primer. That is a step just immediately sorted for you. What I'm going to do now though is turn to a dry brush. We're going to add a bit of texture to the uniform and save us from having to highlight it later. What I've got is a little bit of stone grey from VALLEJO on some kitchen towel here, and I'm working it into a nice soft brush until I'm leaving very little behind. I tend to find the easiest place to start dry brushing is up the arms and along the sleeves, so you get a pretty good idea of what you're going to leave behind. You want to dry brush against areas of detail so that you catch the folds and the creases. The reason why I'm using stone grey is that it's not a true, it has got a little bit of green in it, which means it works super well as our faded field grey. So I'm going to go over the uniform a couple of times until I'm satisfied with what I'm leaving behind, and I've got a bit of definition on this fabric. If you worry that you've applied too much, what you can do is go back with a little bit of the field grey and flatten out some of the areas like on sleeves or trousers. But what I would suggest would be to do a couple of test pieces first where you might think you've gone overboard, because once we shade this, it's going to come together much more smoothly than you'd probably expect. So keep the faith. If you don't like it though, it's very easy to tidy up. I'm going to move on now to Jasper Skin from the Army Painter, and we'll base coat, big surprise, his skin. You can go straight over the top of straps, goggles and what have you. But when you come near the uniform, take your time, slow down, and wherever possible, try and paint away from what you've already done. For his gloves here, I have Grey Castle from the Army Painter. Now, this is a little bit lighter than stone grey, but if you do want to save yourself a paint, you can just go ahead and use stone grey for these gloves as well. Now for this chap's goggles, I'm just going to show you the way that I like to paint them. I'm going to start with Prussian Blue here from VALLEJO. Any dark blue will do the job. Now I'm going to paint these in now because, as you see, I splurge right over the black bits, which are going to be the actual frames for the goggles. Now with a character brush and a little bit of sky blue, I'm going to paint a little L shape quite carefully. It comes off my brush. And I'm making a dreadful mess. And once I have let that mess dry, what I can do is go back to my Prussian Blue. And I might do this off camera actually, but I can tidy up the shape of the highlight there. Now that is still going to look ugly as sin, but we've got a couple of steps left to tidy that up. We're going to get to that after, though, we do any wooden details on the miniature. So I've got here Beige Brown and entrenching tools, and you'll quite often find on these veteran chaps they've got grenades tucked into their boots and belts and what have you. So just tap in the grenade sticks with a little bit of this. Now we turn to what is undoubtedly my favorite color, German grey. Now this is going to fill in for a few different things. This is going to be the black on any leather bits. It's going to be the black on any metallic bits. And as well, once I've got my point right, I'm going to use this to paint in the frames of his glasses, or his goggles rather. I'm doing this now because if I make a mess, I've still got my skin tone that I can tidy up before we move on to any next stages. So, his helmet, the pipes on the flamethrower, the actual little bit of fabric here would have been quite close to this, and I don't mind too much if it's not perfect. Now suddenly those goggles don't look so goofy, and the whole miniature really starts to come together at this point. On your regular infantry, that's going to be quite quick to do. Now strictly speaking, it is accurate if you want to paint the fuel tank and the flamethrower here in the same color, do it in German grey, but that's going to look a little bit dull. So luckily, also accurate, I have here German Camo Dark Green. You can use this or any really dark sort of olive green will do the job. But yeah, you'll probably find 2 coats of this will be necessary. As well as the predominantly black leather on the uniform, there's also a few bits that are in a more brown color. So what I've got for that is German Camo Black Brown. It's nice and dark. And I'm going to paint in the strap on his helmet and also the strap holding his goggles on. Now there are a couple of colors that are going to be visible on most of your other miniatures but don't appear on this guy. It's going to be his bread bag, his water bottle, and any other little mess tins and stuff like that. So in the description, I'm going to make sure that the colors for those are listed even though I haven't used them on this miniature. So if you need those, you don't have to watch a whole other video just to pick those out. Now once you're satisfied with that, you can cruise back and do any little bits of tidy up that you need to. So I have touched in his nose, I'd splurged a little bit of black on that. Any other areas that you need, tidy those now. We're going to leave the flame until later and I'll explain why when we get to it. What we're going to do now is to shade him, and I'm using good old marine juice or sonic tonic. What this is, it works out at 4 parts Lamy and medium, 3 parts Reichland flesh shade, and 3 parts dark tone from the army painter. Now, what that actually works out as is 1 bottle of each, chuck them in a big container and shake them up. But the reason why I'm using this is it's a nice warm-ish brown, but the medium that's in there kind of lets it run a little more freely. And while it looks quite dark going on, once it dries, it's a little more subtle, but we still get all of our shading. So you'll see part of the reason why we did that dry brush on the uniform first is going to give us plenty of texture to the clothing, and we won't have to go back and highlight that with anything. Hurrah! So we're going to go over everything with our marine juice here, and then give them about half an hour to dry. I'll try and find somewhere nice and warm for that. Then once that has dried, you've got plenty of depth, and it doesn't look quite as dark as it does going on, like I mentioned. The shade will also bring together some of the dry brush into that fabric. So remember what I said about not getting rid of too much of the dry brush if you're worried you're overdoing it. Just try it out a couple of times, see what you like the look of. What I'm going to do, there's not really a huge amount in the way of highlighting to do on these fellas because we've already dry brushed the uniform. So with a little bit of barbarian flesh, I'm going to get in, just dot his nose, his chin, and his cheekbones. If you're painting ordinary hands, of course, you could do the backs of his knuckles in the same way. What I'm going to use is just a little bit of that grey castle to paint in the back of his fingers, make the gloves stand out just a little bit more. Now, very carefully, get yourself a little bit of matte white and thin it down just a touch more than you usually would, because you want it to come off your brush relatively easy here. Paint in the markings on his collar here. Go slow, and just a little bit of paint on your brush here. And one other thing I'm going to do is to pop a little white dot up in the corner of each goggle, but I'm going to do that off camera because I cannot maneuver my brush here. Now that is our trooper painted. What he's ready for now is a matte varnish and his base, but before we do that, obviously with a flamethrower, we've got one last detail to paint. So I've got here warped yellow from the army painter. Anything nice and bright is the go-to here. It'll cover relatively well, but just for the sake of being thorough here, once this one's dried, I am going to give this a quick second coat to make sure I've got a really solid yellow color to work from. Now the hotter fire is, the lighter it is. So the yellow part is going to be the hottest part of our flame. What we'll do is grab some lava orange, and we're going to lightly overbrush. I might have a little bit too much on my brush actually, but towards the top of the fire, leaving underneath still that light, very hot orange. And make sure to do both sides because I often forget. Now finally, I'm going to go back to German grey, and I've got a raggedy old brush here. We're going to very lightly dry brush this along the parts where you'd expect to see that sort of smoky fade to black. So little bits at a time. Sort of hold it out at arm's length once you're done to get a feel for, is that looking about right? So once I'm satisfied with this, what I'm going to do is take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish spray. I'm going to use a Color Forges spray here for this. Pop a base on him. The recipe for that will be in the description. Let's get a look at our flamethrower once he's all finished. And so there at last, our German veteran is complete. And like I said earlier, if this is what we can expect from Warlord's plastic kits going forward, I think we're into a real golden age of plastic infantry. They are brilliant. I think the only thing which is really missing from the box set is a mortar, like a light mortar, but it's a trade-off. Considering everything else you get in the box, I'm not too upset by it. So these guys are lightning fast to paint up, especially if you do turn around and use the Fieldgrey primer. Just something to consider if you can pick it up. So again, thank you goes to Warlord for letting me have a couple of sprues of these guys. As well, thanks to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Mean it every time. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.